Get started, Sandra? Okay, all right. All right, so let's do this. Well, welcome everyone, and thank you for joining us for this this vision talk. It's part of a process that we have in the Faculty of Arts for all of our centers and institutes when we are either appointing or renewing a director, as we are here for the Center for Criminological Research. My name is Marie Carrière. For those of you who may not know me, I'm the Associate Dean for Research for the UVA's Faculty of Arts, which is located on Treaty 6 territory in Métis Region 4. But I would like to also acknowledge my own location today in the district of Souk, which occupies the unceded traditional territories of the Tsuk and Skia New Nations. Central to Souk's history is the ongoing presence, influence, and rights of these nations. And as a white French-Canadian settler, it is with tremendous gratitude that I have the honor to regularly visit these absolutely stunning lands. And so, as probably you know already, the Center for Criminological Research fosters debate and critical engagement with the practice of criminological research and with respect to key issues related to research on criminal justice institutions and those who encounter them. We do ask for your feedback on the session today, on the presentation today, which will be followed, I think, if people want, and Sandra's amenable to a bit of Q&A. And you should see at some point a link in the chat. I'm not sure who's here to do that, but during the presentation, I'll try to sort of get that together. And that should take you to a Google form where you can provide comments and your impressions of Sandra's performance today. Otherwise, you can also, oh yes, okay, so Andrea is here and she will add the link, so wonderful. So you will see that link in the chat momentarily. Otherwise, you can also you can email me directly if you like, or you can email the General Arts Dean email, artsdean@ualberta.ca, and I think Andrea will put that in the chat as well. And maybe if you could provide your feedback as soon as possible. I don't know if Andrea set a time on the form, maybe 4 p.m. Friday, let's say. Usually we like to get this done in a timely manner, but feel free to email when you have a chance. So it is now my pleasure to welcome Dr. Sandra Bucerius. Dr. Bucerius is a professor of sociology and criminology and the founder and inaugural director of its Center for Criminological Research. In 2020, she was appointed a Henry Marshall Torrey Chair. She holds numerous research grants and is the director of a newly awarded $2.5 million Shirk Partnership Grant on the intersecting issues of justice and injustice, examining barriers and challenges for people who move through the various institutions of the justice system. Dr. Bucerius is also the director of the University of Alberta Prison Project, the largest mixed methods study on Canadian prisons in the history of Canadian criminology. And her talk today is titled The CCR, Present and Future Directions. Sandra, over to you.
Thank you. And thank you, Marie, for the kind introduction. Thank you so much for providing me the opportunity to speak about my visions for the Center for Criminological Research today. Before I do so, I also would like to acknowledge that as a German native and German citizen and a settler in Canada, I respectfully acknowledge and am privileged that I can speak to you from my house, which is located on Treaty 6 territory, a traditional gathering place for diverse Indigenous peoples whose histories, languages, and cultures continue to influence our vibrant community. Jeff, slide, please. Thank you. So as you know, I've been asked to provide a vision talk for the renewal of my directorship of the Center for Criminological Research. And the way I'm going to structure this talk today is to first speak about the general vision for the CCR and how it came about. It is a new institute, so we are still in our baby shoes. I will then talk about what we have accomplished in these past 2-3 years so far and what we are planning for the future, including some of the financial aspects. And lastly, as this talk is part of the renewal for the directorship, I will also talk about what I bring to the table as a newly appointed director. So the Center for Criminological Research started as an initiative that my colleagues in criminology and I spoke at length about in 2018 and 19. And with the tremendous support of the Department of Sociology in which it is housed, and in particular with the support of our chair at the time, Dr. Seodoro, as well as support from the Faculty of Arts and numerous stakeholders and community members, we have seen our initial ideas come to fruition in 2020. Jeff, slide, please. We have received strong support at the time from a variety of organizations and individuals who were drawing attention to the dire need for a Center for Criminological Research in Western Canada, such as the Institute of Advancement of Aboriginal Women, or the Indigenous Program Facilitator of the Edmonton Institution for Women, the Bent Arrow Traditional Healing Society, but also the Canadian Research Institute for Substance Abuse, the RCMP, and other organizations, to name a few. And I put a few comments from their letters of support at the time on this slide that you can see. From a more academic perspective, while there were some criminological research centers in Eastern Canada and still are, most prominently at the University of Toronto, there was no Western Canadian counterpart of a research center that looks at criminological questions with a sociological lens and considers the complexity of criminological issues. So the CCR is filling exactly that need. Jeff, slide, please. The mission of the center, as I see it, and as is shared among my colleagues, is to provide a think tank, a base from which researchers conduct and coordinate practically oriented and theoretically informed research projects, often partnered with external institutions, such as criminal justice institutions, nonprofits, government, and community groups. And we are particularly interested in carrying out research that understands the criminal justice institutions and systems through the perspectives of both those who work in these institutions and systems and those who encounter them, and particularly people marginalized by factors related to their race, their indigeneity, gender, sexual orientation, social class, substance abuse, and other factors that may contribute to their marginalization. So ultimately, we also have a very strong desire to conduct research that will not only collect dust on bookshelves, but that also has some real-world applications and can be mobilized to create tangible change for some of the most marginalized members of our society. Jeff, slide, please. So our main foci then are to build on our academic excellence by supporting research and knowledge that pushes the boundaries of Canadian criminology and think through some of the complexity of issues and apply a sociological lens to criminological problems, while also disseminating our research across national and international academic communities, and to engage in partnered and community-inspired research projects that provide a critical understanding of criminal justice work. And then again, we are particularly interested in building on our empirical findings to influence policy wherever possible and needed. So the CCR was approved in 2020, and unfortunately, this fell together with our global-19 pandemic, as you know. And so consequently, much of what we had envisioned for our first year and, for example, our opening event had to be readjusted and moved online. So that leaves the question, what have we done so far? Jeff, slide, please. So instead of hosting an opening event that would have brought together students, faculty members, community stakeholders, community justice organizations, and so on in person, we had to pivot and held an online conference themed around prisons and punishment in the fall of 2020. And perhaps partially due to the fact that online conferences were still novel at the time, and people were not yet tired of them, and partially due to the fact that we were able to recruit some of the leading prison and punishment scholars around the globe to be one of the 30 invited speakers. This initial conference was a huge success, and some of our panels, including the keynote delivered by David Garland from NYU, were watched over 2,000 times and are still available for teaching purposes on our YouTube channel and website. Slide, please, Jeff. So while this initial conference was born out of necessity and us trying to be creative at a time when we could not host an in-person event, or the in-person event we had hoped for, it allowed us to perfectly showcase the CCR's mission of being a think tank for academics, community groups, and criminal justice organizations. So we did not only feature academic speakers crossing different approaches and schools of thought, we also paid particular attention to EDI considerations, which are core at everything we do as we put our panels together. And for the CCR, this does not only mean that we're trying to provide space and voice for scholars who belong to equity-seeking groups, but also, and perhaps more crucially, that we provide a platform for engaging with and listening to those who have direct experience with the justice system and whose voices have historically been discounted and silenced and excluded. And so to take this seriously also means that we carefully listen and engage with these voices, even when they are stating opposing views to our scholarly understanding. And everyone who has heard us talk about our work or read our publications knows how deeply ingrained our commitment to this is. So for this particular conference, then, we had two panels in which people with lived experience in the prison system, both as incarcerated people and as loved ones of those who are incarcerated, could speak about their experiences, challenge some of our views and academic knowledge base about the system, and leave us with lots of food for thought and further discussion. The conference also allowed us to create a space to form connections and synergies between a larger cohort of national and international researchers and organizations. And indeed, we received feedback that governmental ministries in both India and Kenya, which we didn't know about, were using our panels for training purposes, while other scholars around the globe continue to assign some of the panels for instructional purposes, which is why we're leaving them on the YouTube channel. So given this, we decided to let the Zoom conference become one of our signature features and followed up with a second 3-day conference on policing in year 2. And looking into the future, we are currently in the planning stages of our 3rd annual Zoom conference on extremism for next year, so for year 4 of the CCR. And I will talk about the conference we held in year 3, so this year in person, actually, a bit later in this talk. The conferences are, of course, only one way in which the CCR's mission as think tank are reflected. Another aspect to this is our monthly speaker series that we have started online and that are bringing together an audience of faculty members, students, stakeholders, and community members. And we are planning on keeping them online for the future for accessibility reasons. Our administrator, Dr. Jeffrey Prasar, and I have worked tirelessly on creating an online presence for us, including this YouTube channel that I've already mentioned, on which all of our talks can be found. We also have social media presence and a website, which essentially allows organizations and community groups, but also representatives of the media, to be more aware of the kinds of work that we're doing and the expertise that we're holding at the CCR. And so consequently, my colleagues and I are often consulted by various government organizations and groups about research ideas and other aspects that they would like to have input on. And I think they've become aware of us through the conferences and speaker series and online presence that we're having. So a few examples. During the COVID-19 pandemic, one of our cross-appointed faculty members, I believe he's in the audience, Dr. Justin Tedrow, and I were involved in writing a policy brief for the Royal Society of Canada on how to manage the COVID-19 pandemic in prison. And this policy brief was ultimately presented to Parliament, and also Canada's Chief Medical Officer, Dr. Theresa Tam, requested a briefing on our suggestions for decarceration. Likewise, just last week, I briefed the National Police Federation, which is the union representing about 20,000 RCMP members, on bail reform. So what aspects they should keep in mind from a criminological evidence-based perspective when making suggestions and requesting changes pertaining to bail. These are just two super quick examples, but these types of consultations are, I think, a direct result of the CCR becoming better known as an organization that government groups and organizations can contact for consultation on research-related questions and questions they are debating within their organizations. But these consultations are also extremely important opportunities for us as criminologists who are interested in changing the justice system in concrete ways, benefiting those who are most affected by harmful policing tactics or prolonged incarceration and so on. So with respect to bail reform, for example, I had an interesting opportunity to talk about balancing short-term public safety and security by sending people to remand without granting bail, which is what some of these organizations have in mind, and long-term public security that may be better achieved by supporting people, not disrupting their personal and community lives when possible, and avoiding the negative repercussions that prolonged prison stays can have, and that they're very much established in the academic literature. So while many of these aspects may seem very obvious to us as we think about them every day, they are not necessarily all that obvious to those who are actually in positions of power. So we at the CCR are in an extremely fortunate position to actually have the ears of organizations that are in power and can help them think through and maybe explain the complexity of some of these issues. And again, this ties back to our vision that we are aiming to make our knowledge and findings accessible. Some of these respects are, of course, person-specific, wanting a particular faculty member to speak on an aspect, but many of them are not. So, for example, we've had lawyers reach out to Jeff asking whether we have faculty members who can speak on specific cases as expert witnesses. Or just tomorrow afternoon, one of the RCMP detachments has invited me as director, but he could have invited anyone, to come and present on our ongoing research at the CCR and discuss in which areas they could potentially consult us to get a sense of our academic knowledge and expertise on particular topics. So it is in these types of engagements and consultations that one of the core missions of the CCR comes to fruition. As I said initially, we want to be a place that allows us to use our empirical findings to influence policy. And as the CCR is an institution that is particularly interested in how people marginalized by various background factors are experiencing the criminal justice system, it is pertinent for us to be in conversations with actors of these systems to push for evidence-based change where possible and where necessary. Slide, please, Jeff. So circling back to what we are trying to accomplish with the CCR and talking about a different aspect, this aspect is one that we were not able to realize immediately when the center opened, which was to create a space in which graduate students and faculty members can meet, build communities, share research ideas, and build synergies. So given the COVID-19 pandemic, we had no opportunities to meet in person and actually have in-person events, but this has changed significantly this year when we were finally able to open up the space that is now housing the CCR, which is on the main floor of Tori. And having a physical space truly allows us to build some community. And one way in which we are doing this is to hold our weekly coffee hour, at which faculty members and graduate students are coming together and coming together informally to share coffee, cookies, and whatever we have available. So while this has initially started off slowly with people only slowly moving back to campus, we initially only had a few people in attendance, but the last few coffee hours were actually attended by around 15 people each. So we are gaining some traction. And I believe it is important, and as part of the mission at the CCR, that graduate students have the opportunity to mingle with faculty members informally, but also have an opportunity to connect with each other on an ongoing basis, to share research ideas and so on. And the success of this is probably shining through best in the fact that there were 2 graduate students who I believe are in the audience who asked Jeff and I to continue these informal coffee hours during spring and summer terms, when we weren't sure whether we should continue to hold them during the off season. And we're also very happy that some of our colleagues from McEwen and Norquest and Augustana have started to join us from time to time, and that some of our colleagues from sociology who are not criminologists are coming as well. So for anyone who's listening and who hasn't visited us, everyone is welcome: students, faculty members, community members, etc. Another aspect in which we are facilitating informal exchanges and community building is that we've been able to create a vibrant working environment for our graduate students and faculty members by accommodating faculty members and graduate students with office spaces. This has been made possible through the physical space that the CCR now has. And we are pleased to see students regularly using the space and enjoying the common areas for meetings and informal gatherings. Looking ahead, we are in the process of figuring out how to accommodate everyone for next year, as the CCR has quickly become a space in which we have more requests for desk space than available. But I believe that's a positive problem to have, and much of campus life has moved away from campus. Lastly, Jeff and I have a weekly, or now during the off-season, bi-weekly email to all the affiliated CCR students, faculty, and friends, summarizing what is going on in our community, including announcing jobs and conferences, sharing accomplishments such as awards or candidacies or thesis defenses, publications, and also introducing our incoming students. So if anyone is listening who isn't part of our email listserv, please let Jeff, and who would like to be, please let Jeff or I know, and we will definitely add you. Now, talking about the financial aspects of the CCR is not as straightforward, and this ties into what we will do in the future. So we are currently not receiving financial support from the university or the faculty or the department. However, last year, as Marie mentioned, I spearheaded this successful $2.5 million SSHRC partnership grant application on the intersecting institutions of justice and injustice. And this partnership is hosted at the CCR. And I built administrative support into the funding application, which currently funds Jeff's position as a project administrator. And this also allows Jeff to do some administrative work for the CCR, which means that it is hard to disentangle exactly the work that is being done under the partnership grant and under the CCR. In many ways, there are significant overlaps. Be it as it may, the CCR could not exist without Jeff, who is doing outstanding work for us, both in person and behind the scenes. And we are happy to have his position solidified through the partnership grant for the next 7 years. Slide, please, Jeff. So the partnership grant allows us to direct some research through the CCR and really contribute to our core aim to conduct theoretically informed empirical projects that will have the potential to make meaningful and evidence system change possible. And so having directed the University of Alberta Prison Project and been in conversation with many community groups and stakeholders about our findings, we know that one of the main sociological criminological areas in which we have very rudimentary understanding in Canada is community reentry post-prison. So for those released from prison, there's a large and growing infrastructure of services aimed at assisting reentry. However, there's no systematic longitudinal research that examines the factors that might contribute to successful reintegration into Canadian society, or alternatively, the factors that might contribute to why people may return to prison. So when prison becomes just a revolving door. So consequently, we currently lack a systematic understanding of the unique challenges for reintegration related to factors such as social connections and employment, race, housing, health, and other domains that have been studied in many other countries. So this leaves Canadian scholars and community groups and policymakers in a unique situation where evidence-based suggestions as to which services are needed to disrupt the cycle of people returning to prison on a regular basis cannot be made. Something that has been identified to colleagues at the CCR as a severe challenge, both by stakeholders working in corrections and by some of our Indigenous partners who are trying to support people in the community post-prison. Our current knowledge is solely based on studies conducted in the US and Europe, which are not easily transferable to the situation in Western Canada, given the unique circumstances of the Western Canadian prison population. For example, Indigenous people reintegrating into reserve communities will have vastly different experiences than people reintegrating into Boston in the United States. And other aspects we often easily forget are the unique contextual factors relevant for life in Alberta. For example, the severe temperatures in Albertan winters, which make survival on the streets much more difficult than what our colleagues report in San Francisco. Now, in conversation with community partners and governmental stakeholders, some of us have decided to follow the call for more systematic research on reentry as one of our main research goals for the future, as it directly ties into the mission of the CCR as a place that produces research that can have tangible impact on real life. And so we were extremely fortunate to be in a situation that we could host a workshop on prisons and reentry at the CCR, funded through the partnership grant. And this workshop was in March of this year. So this allowed us to bring in some of the world's most acclaimed reentry scholars, while also inviting 2 Indigenous speakers who shared their personal experiences with the justice system and reentry post-prison. And the workshop really allowed us to have some brainstorming sessions to think through some of the super complicated logistical challenges and research design questions regarding this study. And being able to do this before the project had even started, we believe, was crucial and allowed us to avoid some pitfalls that other scholars have experienced, but also think through the ways in which Western Canada is truly different from our colleagues' research sites in Norway or the UK or the United States. The workshop also had a public element, as you can see on the slide, and by all accounts, we believe it was a tremendous success. All sessions were attended by more than 40 people, sparking lively discussions and intellectual debates. And to our surprise, some stakeholders in the audience participated in the workshop as their approved training days, which we were not aware of beforehand. So EPS, RCMP, and Alberta Justice sent some of their employees to our workshop as their approved training days. So the CCR has now reached a reputation where some criminal justice agencies will send their employees for training, which we believe is a huge success for us. We also invited 5 incoming graduate students for the event who subsequently accepted our department's admission offers for graduate school, which of course was another way to show the kinds of work we're doing at the CCR, which has probably contributed to their decision to come to U of A. The event was accompanied by several social activities, including a very well-attended pub night for grad students and guests before the event started, lunch, dinner for the guests on day 1, and then a public lunch on day 2, followed by a social event at the chair's house that night. And I believe these social opportunities allowed students to mingle with some of the international guests and build networks, so much so that some graduate students actually invited one of our international speakers as a guest speaker, online guest speaker for their seminar 2 weeks later. So this just goes to show how incredibly valuable these informal get-togethers are for community building as one of the core aspects of the CCR. Slide, please, Jeff. Now, going back to our brainstorming session at the workshop, and because this ties into the future of the research that is happening at the CCR, my colleagues and I, and that is Dr. Phil Badawi, who's a sociologist in the department, Dr. Jana Krekel, Dr. Kevin Haggerty, and then Luca Berardi and Justin Tetro, who are both cross-appointed faculty members. So my colleagues and I, who will be involved in the reintegration study, were able to think through how to best design a study that will have the highest chances of producing data that can be mobilized for system change, but that will also produce an in-depth understanding of the barriers that formerly incarcerated people face and how these barriers differ depending on demographic and contextual factors. So while this project is just one project that will be hosted at the CCR over the next few years, I believe it will significantly shape the future of the CCR and provide tremendous training opportunities for students, as well as tremendous opportunities for stakeholder engagement and have serious policy relevance, which is all critical to the core mission of the CCR. But it will also be able to speak to and build bridges to other projects that other faculty members at the CCR are carrying out. For example, Dr. Bernick's research on homelessness and safe consumption sites in the city, which are obviously critical to the re-entry experience. Our study uses a mixed methods approach, surveying 80% of the currently incarcerated population in Alberta while still in prison, which is a huge sample size. It's going to be a randomized sample of 2,250 people and would be the first time that we could actually make some inferences for the general prison population in Canada. And I think that is an aspect that will be very important to translating our findings into policy recommendations that can be implemented at a later point. At the same time, we're also hoping to conduct 120 in-depth interviews with 60 people identifying as men and 60 identifying as women. And both the quantitative aspect and the qualitative aspect of our study will follow a longitudinal design, with the first baseline survey and interview being conducted while still in custody, and then follow-up surveys and interviews being conducted post-prison at the 2-week post-release mark, 2 months, 4 months, 6 months, and a year. And so this design will obviously provide many research assistant possibilities, but also allow us to capture a person's re-entry experience for the first year post-prison and matches the most prominent international studies in design. And it also allows for a systematic evaluation of the factors that assist during reintegration and or contribute to its failures, and how these factors differ across a different subset of the population. So I can talk at length about the complexities of the studies, but I think some of the crucial elements are that we will be partnering with some of our Indigenous partners who have expressed a strong interest in creating programs supporting the reintegration of Indigenous people post-prison. So our findings will directly inform the creation and implementation of these programs by identifying what works and what doesn't work from a participant perspective, and how this may differ for people from different demographics re-entering into different areas of Albertan society and so on. And second, besides this partnership of our findings will also allow us to speak more broadly to both Alberta Justice in terms of what works regarding release planning, and to community organizations and stakeholders who directly support people who are re-entering society. So again, while only being one project that will be hosted at the center, it reflects the core missions of the CCR perfectly, I think. Slide, please. Now, looking at other aspects of the future, we really are only 1 year into actual in-person activities. So the center is still in its baby shoes. And I believe the activities that I have described that we have done so far have really taken off this year and will continue to take off. So the best slogan for the future right now is that we will continue doing what we're doing to solidify our position as important criminological research center in Western Canada. It is also impossible for me to promise much more at this point, given that we have a very low number of faculty members. We are truly only 6 criminologists. So taking on more is at this point not feasible given the resources we have. I should say that we are already getting more requests from organizations and government for consultations, etc., then we can accommodate. The need for academic input and research in our field is tremendous. But given that we are literally only 6 criminologists at U of A, we have to turn most requests down. That said, we are, I think, at a unique moment in time in the criminological landscape in Canada, where the center will likely continue to gain importance, especially in Western Canada, and bring new possibilities and synergies to U Alberta. This past year, the criminology program at U of A has been ranked 2nd in the country. I think our reputation will likely continue to attract more students with an interest in criminology, and we already receive, again, on the student level as well, more qualified applicants on the undergraduate and graduate level than we can possibly accommodate given our low faculty number. So this brings me to the last point that I need to talk about. Slide, please. Why me as director? So my vision for the CCR as a space of community building and a think tank for academics and stakeholders is directly tied to my visions as a scholar. I think I'm at my best when I can create and be involved in projects that produce cutting-edge work, involve lots of communication between different stakeholders and academics, and produce findings that may be surprising or challenging. And also when I can conduct projects that provide ample training opportunities for students in ways that they may otherwise never have. And if I am involved in projects that have tangible policy impact. I essentially like building things. The University of Alberta prison project that most of you are familiar with probably was just that. And I think the CCR and now the partnership grant are the next logical step. As a researcher, I've been privileged to develop a career focusing on inequality and marginalization in a global context. And I reveal the intricacies of settings that are both difficult to access and to understand: prisons, police organizations, and marginalized street communities. And in doing so, and I think in keeping with the core missions of the center, I strive to center and amplify the lived experiences of people marginalized by their ethnic or racial background and whose voices and experiences tend to be overlooked, silenced, and discounted, such as marginalized immigrants in my early work in Germany or incarcerated people in Canada. And again, and very much in line with what I have envisioned for the center, at the very core of what I do stands my personal ethical obligation to use the privilege that I have in this society to conduct research in partnership with communities and use the evidence that I'm gathering in these research projects to leave the world a better place in a very concrete, pragmatic kind of way. So at the end of the day, I do see it as my responsibility to use my findings to drive social change. And so I'm particularly attuned to the fact that I need to translate and mobilize my research findings for the people who are in positions to have real life impacts, such as the communities I'm working with, but also policymakers and criminal justice organizations. And now I can draw on many different examples in which I've used evidence to initiate or drive change, but for the sake of time, a very concrete one was to use our systematic victimization data from the University of Alberta Prison Project to show that over 85% of our participants had experienced sexual and physical victimization long before coming into contact with the criminal justice system. And these data convinced the ministry to implement victim services for incarcerated people in provincial prisons, a service that had been denied to them before our study. So, but to be able to drive these kinds of discussions, and why I believe I am in a good position to direct the center, one needs connections and have built a network of stakeholders that are willing to listen. And I believe throughout my career, I have done that, and I'm continuously trying to have strong relationships with people and organizations who may have completely opposing views and may not usually talk to each other. So for example, later today, I am meeting with the Edmonton Chief of Police, but I also have a meeting with a support group of people who have incarcerated loved ones tonight. So I have my feet in groups and corners and have conversations and networks with different people. And these connections ultimately help the CCR, I believe, to gain more traction when trying to mobilize our findings, but they will also help when trying to negotiate complicated research agreements with organizations that are typically closed off to independent researchers, such as corrections, for example. Lastly, and perhaps the most overarching point in all of my work is that and one of the reasons why I believe the CCR is firmly rooted in the Department of Sociology is that I'm interested, and I think we're all interested as criminologists, in how various systems interact, how they work in action, and how they treat marginalized people in society unequally, which inevitably requires us to consider foundational questions of power and inequality. So crime is part of my analysis and part of the analysis of the criminologists working at the CCR, but I'm also always trying to provide a holistic and synthesizing analysis, looking at how different systems work together and against people. So, for example, in the case of Indigenous women, incarcerated Indigenous women, I'm trying to understand why our findings show that many of them consider prison perversely, we have to say, a safe place relative to other institutions and systems in society that may have removed them from their Indigenous culture or placed them or their relatives into residential schools, or removed their children into the foster care system, or in some provinces had them participate in forced sterilization for Indigenous women. So focus on prison alone, as many criminologists across the globe are doing, will not contribute to this holistic understanding. So I believe it is this kind of holistic understanding of various systems and how they interact that ultimately drives much of the activities that the center stands for. The reintegration project will ultimately be just that. So a project that will allow us to look at the pathway of reintegration by navigating different types of systems and institutions. Perhaps tied to who I am as a scholar is the fact that I've been able to draw in outstanding international scholars to the activities at the CCR. And despite the fact that my chair has told me that no one would ever come to Edmonton or visit Edmonton, we've been able to host several international scholars at the CCR already. And drawing on my connections in the academic community will, I think, ultimately allow me to continue providing such networking opportunities for the CCR community and particularly for our graduate students. So ultimately then, and I will stop there, I believe that I bring with me a scholarly approach that aligns with the core missions of the CCR. I've been able to attract major research funding that allows us to fund the administrative position at the CCR, and I'm able to connect the CCR community to a wide range of stakeholders and academics that will ultimately open up networking opportunities and synergies for both faculty members and graduate students for the years to come. Thank you.
All right, thank you so much, Sandra, for this overview. That was really, really great to hear. I'm not sure you're qualified for this position, though, after hearing all of that work that you've done. So we'll have to determine that in due time. So thank you for that. I think we have time for some questions or comments if you're open to that. And I can give people a little bit of time to sort of gather their thoughts. Would you mind, Jeffrey, taking the PowerPoint down, or the Google Slides? Oh, there we go. Okay, so I can see things a little bit better here. If people would like to just raise their hands, or I'm happy to entertain questions in the chat if you're shy. I have a quick question to get us started, if you don't mind, unless somebody wants to chime in here. So I guess my question comes more as a, as a humanist interested in the ethics and the methodology of listening. And I've heard you mention, this principle of listening throughout your talk, and I think you started off by saying that it's really important for you and your team to listen to the people you're interviewing, even if what they're saying, either about their experience of the institutions or other lived experience, doesn't align with your scholarly knowledge of those institutions. Anyway, I'm not exact. I don't mean to,
No. I know
what you're saying, but it just really struck me when you said that, and I thought that was really interesting. And I was wondering if you could say a little bit more about that. And I'm not trying to ask you to give examples or anything that you may not want to get into, but I'm just really curious about that and what that means for you as a criminologist, and in terms of the information gathering that you're engaged with.
Sure. No, I can bring numerous examples. One is maybe I don't know if she's in the audience, but one of our graduate students, L'Oreal Giffen, has she's the first author on this piece, in which we look at how incarcerated women in our sample think about a needle exchange program that was implemented in the correctional institution in which they are housed. Now, our scholarly understanding would imply that needle exchange programs are in line with harm reduction approaches and are the way to go. We would have assumed that the incarcerated population would think very positively about this program and take it up as one of the ways in which they can maybe manage their substance use in prison and do so more safely and in less harmful ways. Now, our findings indicate that there's very strong opposition against the implementation of this needle exchange program. The women felt that they were not consulted. There are various reasons. They did not necessarily want a needle exchange program in prison for a variety of reasons. Some find it triggering to know that needles are present in prison. Some feel it might be a safety concern. Others want to see money and resources directed at long-term addiction treatment as opposed to sort of like what they think of as a short-term solution. While they're not opposed to needle exchange in the community, they are very much so in prison. So again, this goes against our scholarly understanding and against what harm reduction scholars may have fought for years and have put their life, work, and effort into it. But we need to be very careful in listening to the population who is housed in a particular space where they feel that there are factors working against why they may or may not embrace a particular policy that was thought to be for them, but is in fact very much not wanted. So anyhow, this is just one example where we are uncovering findings and hear voices speaking about topics in a way that we may not have expected them to. And we then obviously need to think about the larger factors, why is that, what contributes to these perceptions, and how do we go about that, and how do we maybe bridge our scholarly understanding and what the people that we're trying to design policies for actually want.
Mm-hmm. Okay, thank you. Thanks for that.
Sure.
Yes, Jana, go ahead, please.
Sorry, technical difficulties. Thank you for that, Sandra. That was great. I wonder if you could maybe talk a little bit about the type of connection or collaboration you might envision between the CCR and the undergraduate criminology program.
Oh, thank you. Good question coming from you, especially. So no, I mean, this is one area where we need to, I think where we haven't really tapped into all possibilities yet. I think especially more senior undergraduate students could potentially be very much involved in the research projects, especially the one that you and I are now going to be part of at the CCR. I think the CCR will in the future have more training possibilities, and given that the reintegration study we're both going to be part of will hopefully be going on for a number of years. I think this would be a great opportunity to forge some stronger connections with the undergraduate students. But as I was saying in my vision talk, I'm also hoping that even the informal coffee hour, for example, that we're doing, or the online conferences and talks might over time become a place where undergraduate students feel welcome to attend, and they should feel welcome, but they'll come and attend those events. I think that can only be beneficial for not just graduate students, but also undergraduate students. So I'm hoping that we can, and we should probably, you and I should probably talk about how to make it happen that undergraduate students are more aware of our activities, both in terms of research, but also in terms of training and conferences, speaker series, and so on. So I think we should build stronger connections there. Yes.
Awesome.
Yeah, if I can just interject, I see another hand. Oliver, I do see your hand. One way of thinking about that is integrating CCR activities, or even just the very existence of the CCR in an undergraduate course. And so I've done that with the CLC, the Canadian Literature Centre, where I actually gave a course, a third-year level course on the CLC. And just all of and this is in a literary context, but if you sort of transfer that to sociological context, where all of the questions about cultural production that the CLC is ultimately not just raising, but constantly struggling with, right, as a cultural institution itself, and all of the contradictions that come with that, and in colonial Canada, and under the rubric of doing Canadian literatures. I mean, this led to an actual course, and really opened the students to just that the CLC existed, but also the types of activities, the community, the outward community activities of the CLC were something that they could be part of. And that, that was sort of part of creating that landscape that they themselves are studying as students of Canadian literature, right? So that certainly was I think a really successful experiment, and actually made it onto the curriculum of the English program now, where there is a course on the CLC that is on the books. Anyway, just thought I'd interject there. Oliver, go ahead, please.
So I'm in a new role now, but I worked very closely with or near the CCR over the last years. And honestly, I just want to compliment that team. It's a bit astonishing. Just to give perspective, I work with 17 to 20 teams in general over a given year. And this team grew and flourished in one of the most complex times in the university's history. Both the pandemic, then the restructuring, and then all this stuff, but also scale. When you have a team of a certain size and, university levels want scale to grow, it's really complicated to do it smoothly. And just as an observation, I've rarely seen anyone scale like this team. And then to have community and both local and national capacity building. It's been really, really wonderful to see.
Yes, you were getting trouble with that question.
Okay, I'll stop
But you
there.
got trouble with others, and
Thank you.
Justin, do you want to go next, please?
Sure, yeah. I also have to run to 10:30, so I wanted to get my question in. As people probably know, I'm also on the project, but I'm still new to working at the university and everything. And I guess my question for you, Sandra, is, criminology departments are typically separate or on their own. And our center is kind of part of sociology. So I guess I'm just wondering what you think like the differences or benefits are from being inside of a sociology department rather than, separate from it.
Sure, thank you. So yeah, you're right. I mean, when you're looking at the Canadian landscape of criminology, there's, am I muted? No, sorry. There are some criminology centers or departments that are separate. So for example, at U of T, the center is a separate institution. SFU is probably the largest criminology department in the country. I don't even know how many faculty members they currently have, but close to what we have in sociology or even more. That is one way to go. I think my personal view on this is, given that we are often interested in very complex issues that ultimately go back to foundational questions of how our society works and what larger social and structural factors are influencing the issues that we are looking at, whether that is colonialism, questions of inequality, questions of power, etc. These are foundational sociological questions. And I think if we're just taking a criminal justice view or criminology view, we are missing some of the broader questions and structural issues that we ought to pay attention to. So that's why I said I think crime is part of our analysis as criminologists, but ultimately I see myself as a scholar, and I think we all see ourselves as criminologists at U of A as scholars who are studying issues of marginalization, inequality, and so on. And crime might be one of the outcomes which we're looking at, but we're, I think, more interested in looking at systems that have created these outcomes more broadly. And that ultimately is those are sociological questions. And I think, I mean, I'm a trained sociologist. I think most of us are, but even independent of that, I firmly believe that criminology is a side interest of sociologists and should be rooted within sociology and not a standalone discipline.
Okay, thanks, Sandra.
That's my view.
Okay. Wonderful. Well, I'm not seeing any other hands, and of course you will have an opportunity to provide some feedback. A line or two is fine. You know, I know people are busy, but it'd be great to hear from people if you can find a quick, 3-5 minutes to go to the Google form and give us provide your thoughts. Much appreciated. So thank you everyone for being here today. It's really great to see such a robust turnout. I think this is a testament to the success of the CCR, even if it's still a little bit in its nascent stages because of the interruptions that have occurred in the past few years. But very, very exciting work, very exciting future for the CCR. And this was very inspirational to me as I kind of move into the next meeting, which is the consultation on the university's draft strategic plan for research. And so if any of you have, some time to kill, please join me in that other session. We need a lot of arts voices in that space. Things are a little bit precarious for us, I think, right now. So, and anyway, let's not end on that dark note. So thank you so much, Sandra, for that wonderful talk. And again, thanks to all of you for being here. And we will follow up very shortly indeed. Enjoy the rest of your day. And yeah, we'll take care, everybody.
Thank you. And thank you everyone for coming and for providing me the opportunity to speak. Thanks, Marie.
Thank you.